All right, good evening. Welcome to Keeping Money Local, a Illinois seminar series. My name is Byron Fager from the Illinois Community Foundation. I'll be your host tonight. I want to recognize our organizers tonight, which is the Southern Illinois Community Foundation, Carbondale Spring, Cristados, then the Southern Illinois Collaborative Kitchen, the Climate Economy Education Incorporated, Egyptian Electric Cooperative Association, and the City of Harrisburg. Special thanks to financial support from Carbondale Spring and Egyptian Electric Cooperative Association, and in-kind donations from shopcarbondale.com web services. We'd like to take just a minute and hear from Sonia Kruger from the Carbondale Spring.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for being with us this evening. My name is Sonia Kruger, and I represent Carbondale Spring People's Movement, whose mission is to create solutions that meet the basic needs for every person in town. 2 years ago, we came together to develop a system of mutual support, and after a year of research and weekly meetings, 4 programs were organized. These include food autonomy, solar and renewable energy development, cooperative small business ownership, and care worker response. In 2020 alone, the Food Autonomy Board coordinated 3 summer gardens, 2 fall gardens, and providing the funds, labor, and resources for the community gardens. They provided specialized training, leading to the construction of 15 chicken coops, door-to-door produce deliveries, free meal programs, educational outdoor workshops, the cultivation of new food forests, and a plant and tree giveaway program. To learn more about the cumulative impact of Carbondale Springs' mission, visit us at our website, carbondalespring.org.
All right, thank you, Sonia. We appreciate that. So as we get started, I want to set up a few parameters for this evening. We are pleased to have 3 presentations set up for you tonight. In the interest of time, we want to make sure that we have enough to get through all the presentations, so we're going to ask you to enter any questions into the Q&A section of this meeting, or to the chat section if you cannot get to the Q&A. At the end, we will work our way through as many questions as possible, depending on how much time we have left. Workers in the human services system. He also owned a graphics and advertising company in New York City, where he combined his skill and knowledge to create social marketing campaigns. He was one of the core leaders to create the universal pre-K program in New York State and the local food movement in Illinois. His last work was to manage an organic farm in Southern Illinois. He has consulted with international NGOs on management strategies and participated in Earth Summit in Brazil and the Social Summit in Denmark. He is now retired and living in Carbondale, Illinois, and he is a volunteer with the Carbondale Spring Food Autonomy Project.
I guess I can take my mask off. Hello, everyone. My name is Chuck Peprocki. I'm glad you could all join us tonight. In this opening seminar, we want to introduce you to a vision of how the people of Southern Illinois can create our own economy by using our own labor, tools, resources, and money. The purpose of our homegrown economy in an environmentally sustainable manner. Our economy will be based upon cooperation, not competition. Priority will be given to meeting our common needs rather than individual profit. Our products will primarily be consumed in local markets, not produced for export. Our economy will protect and give back to the land instead of extracting from it beyond its means to reproduce itself. Our economy will keep money in the local area instead of sending it off to distant corporate coffers. In these challenging times, when the global economy has sidelined us, when our environment is under threat of destruction, and a global pandemic keeps us in jeopardy, there is no reason that we need to sit back and depend upon multinational corporations and the federal government to control our social and economic life from afar. It is time that we take back control of our own lives and rebuild our sense of community. This panel will step back from the current reality and raise the questions: what kind of Southern Illinois do we really want to live in? And how do we create this kind of Southern Illinois? We want our answers to address the greatest good for the greatest number of people, including those most disadvantaged among us. As such, we envision the following requirements be met. We require a common vision of mutual support to which we can all subscribe. We require a local economy under our own control that meets our own basic necessities in a manner that is ongoing and environmentally sustainable. We require equal opportunity for women and people of minorities. We also require cultural pluralism, religious tolerance, environmental protection, the development of small businesses like workers' cooperatives that encourage local economic democracy. And finally, we require a political process based upon local decision-making. Just how we meet these specifications is a subject that requires all of our thinking. The organizers of this series, this seminar series, will get the ball rolling by creating an online think tank that will be featured on the Clean Network website as our seminar series gets underway. We invite anyone who is interested in participating in such a think tank to register on Clean Network and express your desire to do so. Amy McMurrow will explain the details of how you can get engaged later in this presentation. By basic needs, we mean food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, and education. These are the industries that we want under our own control. The creation of a local basic needs economy is not a new idea. When we look at local people's efforts around the world that are working to achieve economic security in this way, we see that they share common features. These are that the people have strong relationships and focus on local opportunities. They create networks of small enterprises, often in clusters by sector and geographic region. Cooperatives play a key role in economic development. There is a public-private agency that promotes regional development and sponsors local service centers for applied assistance. The region has diversified financial mechanisms. We will discuss a few of these throughout this seminar series. There is supportive legislation and an empowering governance structure. Farming operations are integrated to feed the local people nutritious food in an environmentally sustainable manner. There is a key role for schools. And finally, the local resource base is regenerated and sustained under the control of local people. In order to create real social security for all people in Southern Illinois, it will require that we come together and make a plan to employ 100% of all local people who are ready, willing, and able to participate. Our strategy will be to maximize the number of local industries, keeping in mind our resource base and the local people's needs. In a minute, Mr. James Quilligan will teach us how to determine whether our plan can be implemented within the restrictions of the local ecosystem that we inhabit. It should go without saying that the building of a self-reliant economy will require all of our support. We need to be willing to use our own labor, tools, businesses, institutions, and our own money to build something that we can all be proud of and that brings us together as a people. In other words, The purpose of our economy is to meet our basic needs in a way that creates a sense of community and mutual trust. This is how we make Southern Illinois a place that we all want to live in. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Chuck, for that information. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll come back for Q&A at the end of our next two presenters. Our next presenter is James Quilligan, who has been an analyst and administrator in the field of international development since 1975. He was a policy advisor and press secretary for the Brandt Commission between 1978 and 1984, and is presently managing director of the Center for Global Negotiations and Global Commons Trust. Mr. Quilligan has been an economic consultant for government agencies in Mexico, Argentina, Ecuador, Brazil, Bolivia, Great Britain, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Portugal, Germany, Austria, Norway, Sweden, Ivory Coast, Algeria, Tanzania, Kuwait, India, Thailand, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Canada, and the United States. Hope we didn't want to leave one out there, so there's quite a few. In addition, he has served as an advisor for several United Nations programs and international development organizations. James will discuss and illustrate how the Economic Democracy Advocates is using carrying capacity to keep money local. James?
Well, thanks very much, Byram. I appreciate the introduction. I want to talk about carrying capacity of agriculture, but I want to mention that this presentation will be in two parts. The first part will give you a little general background, and then the second part will give you a case study. Now, unfortunately, I wish I could give you a case study of Southern Illinois. However, we have been working with Carbondale Spring over the last several months to get that off the ground, and we're still in preparation for that. But at the moment, I'm going to get the case study that we're going to be seeing in part 2 of this presentation has to do with the area that I live in, which is in Western North Carolina in the greater Asheville area. So it's going to be a study of the carrying capacity of the greater region here. But it'll give you an example of what can be done in Southern Illinois. The first thing is, I want to go back to 1970 and a fairly significant event that took place at that time that we're only realizing in hindsight. That's a moment when the ecological reserve of the planet, which is specified in green, and imagine this ecological reserve goes back to time immemorial. I mean, it's the beginning of human beings and before, because what it means is that before roughly around 1970, the demand of the planet did not overshoot the carrying capacity of the planet. So that meant that before 1970, the world was able to provide for the demand of civilization. After 1970, we've been in an ecological deficit. And so this graph kind of dramatically illustrates that. Thanks to our friends in the Global Footprint Network for this. But the situation is getting worse. And so what's to be done? And people across the world are using resources faster than nature can replenish them. And it means that each year Earth's population is exceeding its biocapacity by more than 60%. Society hasn't really discovered this on a broad scale yet. There's a lot of recognition that this may be the case, but nobody's really doing much about it. And it's very serious. Free markets are responsible for this primarily. It's an overshoot that could conceivably destroy the planet. We do know it's related to climate change, but it's also related to the inequality, social inequality, economic inequality across the world. And it's all rooted in exponential growth. And free markets, which cause this problem, are not really able to solve it because their purpose of free markets is not to create sustainable solutions. That's not what that's not what the algorithms behind free markets is equipped to do. The current economic system responds less to people's basic needs than to their wants as consumers. And that results, as I said, in both social inequality and ecological degradation. For a long time now, since the 60s, 70s, and 80s, global society has been seeking some kind of way of measuring the relationship between the needs of the population and its support systems, which goes beyond the marketplace, which goes beyond the commercial relationships that we're mostly familiar with. When we do much measurement at all, it's all about prices and how much things will cost. It's not so much about the ecological sustainability, which has its own set of metrics. That's why we need to flatten this curve from exponential growth to logistic growth, which represents the carrying capacity of the environment. You've heard a lot probably about degrowth. Well, degrowth is a misnomer because what it suggests is that there's absolutely no growth at all, which would be absolute disaster for the planet. If you begin to unpack degrowth, they're really talking about lesser growth. But the startling nature of the word degrowth is a little bit alarming. However, my organization, EDA, Economic Democracy Advocates, is focused more on this idea of biocapacity or carrying capacity. And that we're studying it in terms of empirical metric. And we understand that it's really it has the potential at least of slowing exponential growth and generating local and regional sustainability. So what you're going to see in part 2 of this presentation is that we're not going to be measuring keeping money local in terms of money. We're going to be studying it in terms of why we keep food local and showing you a different way of measuring how that's done rather than just monetary terms alone. Carrying capacity is what this is based on. It's the level of resources that an environment can carry or sustain to meet the needs of its population and avoid going into overshoot, as you see illustrated in this diagram. There's a lot of historical evidence that, at least on a small scale, farmers and village planners have used a kind of measure like this since the very earliest days of civilization. Agronomy is a familiar term, somewhat familiar term to many of you, and it's actually the basis of economics. That's how economics grew out of agronomy. And it's a familiar form of carrying capacity, a scientific way of defining, apportioning, and distributing resources to meet the needs of a population in a small area. And we think that's pretty important right now because as globalization has failed us and the tide is turning from global solutions to local solutions, and one by one, those local solutions can scale up to a global solution. The problem is that no civilization in history has used this measure at scale. That measure being the equilibrium between the size of a population in an area and its available resources, and using it as a basis for shaping public policy. Hasn't been done on a broad scale. Our dilemma right now is that we need to do this very rapidly. But if we were to try to do this on a global scale, we would all not know where to turn. And indeed, the international politicians don't know where to turn right now. In fact, they're waiting on people like us at local levels to make this happen so that we can push them to implement the same kinds of policies at the international level. The problem is, as you know, there's a limited amount of time to be able to do this. We're going to have to do this within the next 20 years, 25 years perhaps. So it's going to be a Manhattan Project on steroids. Exponential growth has driven global resource use and population growth to unsustainable levels. And we're going to have to change that model. This is the formula that economic democracy advocates has been using. We're in the process of operationalizing this in a technological app so that people could use this on their smartphones. We've enhanced the formula somewhat, but it's based on this particular formula. We've recognized that some of the measures here need to be modified slightly to, for example, cover evapotranspiration or food waste or other modifying factors. But given all that, we've been able to produce some results that are pretty astounding. So this is part two. This is the food and water sustainability in the Upper French Broad River watershed in Western North Carolina. And as I said before, we would love to do a study like this in Greater Carbondale, Southern Illinois region. I'd like to draw a distinction first between ecosystems and bioregions. Really, they do come down to the same thing, but there are two different ways of looking at the same thing. The ecosystem is, we know in terms of the definition through structural and logical thinking. It means, a community of living organisms in conjunction with non-living components of the habitat that are interacting as a system through flows of material and energy, which are self-organizing and measurable. So this emphasizes a kind of left brain way of looking at it, which is rational and logical. The bioregion, on the other hand, has not been measured much. It's increasingly being measured, but we as a civilization don't know what to do with the bioregions. We can measure them and try to conserve them, but we're not doing it in a rational way. Bioregion essentially is a regional ecosystem within which a community of human beings has the capacity to measure and manage its habitat, but it's not organized yet to do so. And that's the problem, but it's also the beauty of what we're getting into now. And the bioregion is kind of more at this point a cultural and intuitive phenomenon than it is structural and logical. So that's the first distinction. And the second distinction is that there's many different ways of defining a bioregion, and they're all very legitimate. You could do it geologically, hydrologically in terms of water, topographically, in terms of climate. There's a lot of ways to look at it. And that's one of the things that's holding back the analysis of bioregions, because people are jumping into a lot of different areas to begin to measure it. For reasons which will become evident as I go on, economic democracy advocates is using a hydrological approach that is focused on watersheds. And we're using data from the US Geological Survey, plus a lot of other sources. Now, in terms of the US Geological Survey, they have several different units of measuring watersheds. This is one of them. Now, the reason we chose this scale of watersheds in the United States is to bring it at the level of local decision-making so that political decisions in the future can be made about the management of the bioregions. So it is a matter of scale at one level. We think it's important to be able to do that. Now, watersheds in North Carolina, there are quite a few of them at this scale. In Western North Carolina, we're at where it says Upper French Broad, and that's what we're going to be getting into. But when you think of North Carolina, you think of like you would Illinois or any state in the United States. You think about it in terms of the black areas which you see, or the counties in North Carolina. So this is where the relationship between the blue region, which is all the different bioregions or watersheds, and North Carolina itself in terms of counties. And you see how they overlap. But the key thing to recognize here, it's very important, because this just looks like a pile of spaghetti or something, you know. The key problem is, you see that the counties don't line up with the bioregions. Obviously, the counties are political districts that did not have their origins in bioregions, so we couldn't expect them to line up. But the problem right now is The more we can align our political districts with our bioregions, the better decision-making we're going to be making in terms of how to manage those bioregions. And the place in dark blue there is the French Broad River, Upper French Broad River. And this is important because it's kind of unusual, but in the Northern Hemisphere, there are only a couple rivers that run to the north. And the reason this is called the French Broad River is that to the north is Tennessee, which is in the white area to the left. And this is actually the origin of the French Broad River. So it's called Upper French Broad River. And then even though it goes north, it's moving into the Lower French Broad River. So that's something to keep in mind because the term Upper French Broad River could be confusing otherwise. And that's the way it looks on a map of North Carolina's counties. So you'll see that within the Upper French Broad River Basin, there are 5 counties, including the one to the north, which is in Tennessee, partly in Tennessee, and then the 4 in North Carolina, which we'll be identifying and talking about for the rest of the presentation. And those counties are Cook County in Tennessee, Madison County in North Carolina, Buncombe County, Henderson County, and Transylvania County. Now it's interesting that the Upper French Broad River begins at a waterfall that is in Transylvania County, and then a lot of tributaries move into it, and then it goes through this water basin up through Tennessee, becomes the Lower French Broad River, and then it moves into the Mississippi. So the key research question that economic democracy advocates is looking at is not so much how to keep money local. We're concerned with that, and we'll get to that toward the end of the conversation here. But we're concerned about how will we organize society within our watershed area to ensure equitability and sustainability. And that means greater political decision-making, greater community involvement in the decisions of how to manage our watershed. That's really what's important. And you think back to the origins of civilization in the United States, at least the white immigration to the United States, people settled by their rivers because it gave them a source of transportation, commerce, and livelihood. And therefore, most of the development in the United States in the early days was around the rivers. And indeed, around the world, it's the same thing. People will move off into remote areas, but they're still looking for water sources all along. So the idea of being associated with a watershed is not anything that's new. Culture and society, economics, ecology has always revolved around basic watersheds. So that's one of the reasons why we're focused on it as a way of creating synergy, greater synergy and self-sufficiency for the people that live in that watershed. So we're examining the region's carrying capacity, the amount of resources in the watershed that are available to meet the needs of its human population. And here we go. So this is a quick overview of what the different indicators show for the 5-county area of the Upper French Broad River. Here we see the area in dark is the area that receives the most precipitation, and the area in lighter colors receives less precipitation. And this is measured in millions of gallons of water per year. The amount of water withdrawals, not the amount of precipitation, but the amount of water that's used is also illustrated here. And Transylvania County to the south has the greatest water withdrawals. And as a sidebar, the reason that is so, even though it has a very low population, is because there are a lot of fisheries that are that have emerged there because of the fresh water coming from the waterfall, which actually is used to make side lakes for fish farming, and it's one of the leading fish farming areas in the United States. So this is about water withdrawals. And secondly is Buncombe County, which is in the dark blue, which is where Asheville is. Greater Asheville, of course, has a lot of withdrawals because there's a higher population there. Madison County in white has the least amount of withdrawals because it has the least amount of population. So it moves along that kind of way. And again, what I'm showing you right now are the indicators that are leading us to the computation of carrying capacity. But these are things to keep in mind as you go. So you know what comprises carrying capacity when we get to it. The next thing is the water usage compared with the average in the United States. So the water usage in the dark blue in Transylvania County, as I said, where there are fish farms, is much greater than it is in the rest of the upper French Broad River Basin and in populated Henderson or the Asheville area in Buncombe County in the middle, in the dark but not completely dark blue area, is also a negative number. So what that means is that Transylvania County and Buncombe County in the middle are actually using more water than the average use in the United States. So water, we specialize in water, but that's not the nature of this presentation. It's about food. It's about the use of the land. But I wanted to use the water to show that, first of all, there's a way of measuring the carrying capacity of water, but that even in when you approach agriculture, you really do have to understand the amount of water in the region so that you can get to understanding how the carrying capacity of food is actually computed. So let's look at food as a biomass. So bio means the energy, and we measure that in calories. And the mass is the weight, which we measure in pounds. And those are the figures that we use to determine the agricultural sustainability of the watershed. So following this, you'll be hearing a conversation about agriculture and food as it's measured by weight and by its energy. We start with population, which is pretty easy to grasp. The metro area in Buncombe County in the middle, where Asheville is, has the most people, so has the broadest population. The white area to the north, Madison County, has only 23,000 people. So these are just strict figures out of the US Census data. And then we compare that eventually. Well, in the next step, we're going to be comparing it with acres of cropland, but let's take a look at the acres of cropland. The darker areas show the more arable land that's available for agriculture, and the lighter areas show the areas that have less arable land that's available for agriculture. Now, so it's not, we shouldn't be confused that it's the size of the county that we're looking at here. It's more that these are the acres of available cropland within that county. That's really what we're measuring. The amount of land that's actually available for agricultural development. Then now we're beginning to look at the self-sufficiency of the region. So here we're looking at the population that the calories that are produced in each county can support. So we've looked at the population, and now we're recognizing that, let's say in Buncombe County, which is in the middle, which is Asheville, Buncombe County can produce 500 million calories to support its local population each year. These are annual figures. And you can see the variances between the different counties in the bioregion. And it's an interesting figure, but we build on that figure to go a little deeper. Now, this is the population that can be fed by the food grown in the county. Imagine computing this. We're looking at Buncombe County as having I don't know, I think it said 250,000, roughly 250,000 people. Well, in the Buncombe County's in the middle, but the population that can be fed by the food that's grown in the county is only 76,000 people. So that's a telling figure. That means that Buncombe County is is importing a lot of food into the county. Okay, well, we can understand that through market sales, but this is another way to understand it thermodynamically through the amount of food that we can measure in calories and pounds of food that are grown in the area. These are measures of the self-sufficiency of the county. This figure shows that Buncombe County in dark green is 330 times greater, rather, no, that's not right. It's 3 times greater than its carrying capacity. So it's at 330% of its carrying capacity currently. So the watersheds that are under 100% can support their own population. That means the two that are at the north, Cook County in Tennessee and Madison County, which is north of Asheville. And then the other 3 counties below that are really not able to completely support their own population. What it simply means is that they're bringing food in from other places. But as a measure of self-sufficiency, this is a red flag, because if it comes down to becoming self-reliant on your own food, this is a signal that these areas are overpopulated vis-a-vis the arable land that they have to support their own population. And as a rule of thumb, of course, it makes sense that urban areas, metropolitan areas, which are using up land and have a greater population, are going to be above their carrying capacity. And when we go into cities and places like that, the figures are off the charts, and it's kind of a no-brainer. But what we're really doing here is to illustrate the fact that these metropolitan areas are completely above their carrying capacity, and therefore, in the time of a economic crisis, they're going to be in real trouble. And we have been talking to politicians about that and showing them the data about this, but I'll get to that. This is the food self-sufficiency in terms of pounds of food, and the darker areas are net exporters of food. Okay, so that means Cook County in Tennessee, Madison County to the north of Buncombe, and the 3 counties below that actually are net importers of food. Okay, that's pretty clear. Now, this is the Upper French Broad watershed in terms of the total calories that it produces. This is interesting because it shows that Cook County in Tennessee produces the most, produces 187 billion calories a year. And that's not based on the population, it's just the raw number of calories that it can produce. And Buncombe County is, Henderson County, south of Buncombe County, which is in beet red, at 185 billion calories. And then third is Buncombe County again with 143 billion calories that it produces annually. This is the calories now that's consumed. Remember, the previous one was the calories produced. All right, so these are relative figures too. So you can see the Tennessee County, Cook County, actually consumes much less than it produces in terms of calories. Buncombe County is very high in consuming the calories that it's produced as well. This is an interesting figure because it shows that the population that can be fed by the calories produced in the county is a result of the 2 previous calculations that we've looked at in the 2 previous slides. So this is the result of those two slides. And it shows that the population that can be fed by calories in Cook County in Tennessee, Henderson County, south of Buncombe County, is more than Buncombe County itself. And then now the key thing here is that the carrying capacity in calories of food consumed is the primary indicator that we're after. So this is a moment where we'll spend a little bit of time with this data. The only alarm bell in this whole upper French Broad River basin is Buncombe County, because of its metropolitan area, because of it has much less arable land now to produce calories, that it's well over its carrying capacity for producing calories to feed the needs of its own population. And the other areas are within their carrying capacity. Also, the food self-sufficiency in calories per county, you'll see that as a result of the last figures, Buncombe County in the center is having to be a net exporter of its food calories, because it needs to produce actually, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. The Buncombe County in the middle is the net importer of food calories, because it's well behind in its production of food calories to meet the needs of its population. Sorry, after a while I get these things jumbled because I slip from one to the other. These are all separate studies, and they're all done with stacks of analysis that we run through computers that computes each of these formulas independently. So that's where all the numbers come from, and they do have a lot of variances in them. But again, Buncombe County is a net importer of food calories. Now here's where we get into monetary figures. Now we have a lot more data around this, but I'm only going to show you two slides about the monetary aspect of this. And the sidebar here is that why wouldn't we just start with the dollar value of food in the county? Well, because we're trying to create a metric that's separate from commercial value. And we're looking at the thermodynamics. Remember, the biomass, meaning the bio meaning the energy, the calories, and the mass meaning the weight of food. And so it's the biomass that we're really interested first, and then translating that into dollar terms. If you don't do that, then you're kind of working with a circular metric, because all you're computing is the amount of money people are willing to pay for food. That's all you're getting with a dollar analysis if you don't go through this process first. The amount of money people are willing to pay for food, meaning what the price of the food is. And that is mainly what you're getting if you're talking about keeping money local. Now, if you're talking about keeping food local in order to produce money, that's another question, and that's what we're trying to answer in this presentation. So in this sense, that the dollar value of food produced in Buncombe County in the middle is $48 million a year. And Madison County, with a lesser population, a mountainous region, meaning it has less arable land, is around $5 million a year. This is necessary to get to the next step, to look at the net food value, the net value of food needs. So the negative numbers, like Buncombe County in the middle, are dollars that are spent by the county to import food. So it has a deficit of food that's produced to feed its population. Therefore, it has to bring in food from the outside. And there are two other negative figures below that in the counties below. And then the two counties to the north of Buncombe County are actually have a net surplus in food value. As I say, we've produced a number of other monetary aspects of this, but I decided to show you mostly the thermodynamic aspects which go into the computation of these numbers. So, you know, we have taken this to a lot of policymakers, and they sit there with their jaws wide open. They've never heard anything like this before. And we try to make it simple by showing these maps and picking out the most extreme variances to basically, you know, have a 30-second soundbite that we can go to our foot in the door and try to suggest policy to correct these imbalances. So we've had some limited success in doing this, and we're building our organization around this kind of valuation and this kind of advocacy to elected officials, to explain to them the serious nature of this, particularly as climate change moves on, as population growth moves on, as resources are in decline across the world, and there's increasing competition for those resources, and poor management of our bioregions, because the bioregions often cut through the political districts, or you could look at it the other way, the political districts cut through the political boundaries cut through the districts of the bioregions. So let's look for a second at who exactly is making decisions in most of our counties in the United States about how to manage their bioregions. County officers, state house representatives, state senators, U.S. congressional representatives. And, you know, there's 5 counties in the upper French Broad River watershed. But let's take, for example, the U.S. congressional districts in the region. So the watershed is in blue. And if you refocus a bit, District 1 is in Tennessee, District 11 is in North Carolina, and District 10 is in North Carolina. Now, those are the relevant congressional districts. So you can see that the bioregion, if you go back to the bioregion again in blue, you can see that it's broken up into different decision-making areas. So this is a real drawback, and it's a challenge to make adequate decisions about the management of the food in the region itself, because the people in Tennessee don't care what's happening in North Carolina, for example, and the people in Region 10 don't care about what's happening in District 11. Same thing with state senate districts. You know, again, in blue, it's the bioregional area, the watershed. And then you see it's divided up into 4 different districts, state senate districts, who are all making internal decisions about the management of the bioregion. They're not cooperating much, if at all. So when political districts don't align with a watershed, the public administration of that watershed is really hard. And so it's up to the people themselves to figure this out and to advocate for policies that align decision-making with the needs of improving the watershed. For the French Broad River, for example, we've had a tremendous problem with pollution in the river. And only now have the water banks or the banks along the water been cleaned up, and the water is being tested more frequently, and ways are being created to improve the situation. But that's only a small part of it. It's the heart of the problem in the area, but the problem is much larger. Even after the river is cleaned up, it doesn't mean that the watershed is actually sustainable and becomes self-sufficient. So it's only the beginning, but it's a good place to start. And what we did in creating the study was to go to people who were cleaning up the river and said, look, you guys are the ones who have to get this ball rolling to build out a greater understanding culturally and socially, politically, economically within the watershed, that a healthy river means a healthy watershed, and a healthy watershed is going to mean a healthy economy. You know, it's important to recognize that, you know, some people say, I don't care about watersheds. Every square inch of land is within a watershed. So you should have some recognition, at least, of the importance of watersheds. It's extremely important. This is a few of the things EDA's done as I'm wrapping up here. We've been creating several reports, And we're also, we've created conferences. This is one last year, our 3rd annual conference. Actually, we're having another conference on November 7th. If you're interested, I can give you more information about that. It's an online conference for the first time this year because of COVID-19. We have 2 outstanding speakers. One is Jean Russell, she's the pioneer of the thrivability movement. And Claire Politano is working with Terran Collective, who are using this technology called Hilo, which is an open source technology to track sustainability in actually across the world, but they're beginning where they're located in the San Francisco area. Our long-term goal is to do eco-districting. And what does that mean? And well, you can kind of get a sense that what we're realizing is that the political boundaries are not lining up with the bioregional boundaries. And therefore, how do we bring those together so that we can make better political decisions to manage our bioregions, particularly as we're going into these emergency years ahead? It can also be used to end partisan redistricting by providing demographic and ecological data that could eventually move political boundaries toward natural boundaries. What I mean by this is, through gerrymandering, we've realized that, particularly in North Carolina, that at the stroke of a pen, a region can be redistricted. And I moved here 5 years ago to North Carolina. Our area has been redistricted, I think 4 times. I've lost count now, over and over again. And so, of course, they're doing it for partisan purposes. But the point is the mutability of these political districts, that can be changed. And what if there was a movement to change the political districts more toward the bioregional area so that you could create greater synergy within your watershed? Well, that's one of the things we'd like to do. But, the enormity of the challenge of this is that the blue districts, of course, the watersheds, and the green districts are the US congressional districts in the United States. So you can see all of the broad divergences there. I mean, there's nothing that aligns. It's like again a plate of spaghetti. And how can you create order out of that? Well, we think it's possible because the more this idea takes hold, the more we can begin to roll back, or at least create a movement to roll back the political boundaries toward the eco-districts, the bioregional districts, that is. And as we do that, we're finding out a lot of success because people really get excited about that idea, and they recognize that that is a potential way that people can have direct decision-making over the fate of their environment in which they live. That's the people who produced the study. And with that, I will end the presentation. Thanks very much for your attention.
All right, thank you, James. We appreciate that. And I've got a few questions that are coming in, but like I said, we're going to hold those till the end. Up next is Amy McMorrow-Hunter. She is the president and CEO of the Climate Economy Education Incorporated, a nonprofit for education on lifestyles and business models that are good for the climate, the economy, and humanity. Amy's introducing the Climate Economy's Clean Network, an online an online platform for community capacity building. Amy?
Thank you, Byram, and thank you, James, for that awesome presentation. I've got a bunch of questions for you for later, so I look forward to the Q&A. I'm just going to go really quick through Clean Network. All right, so Clean Network is the Climate Economy Action Network. It's at cleannetwork.com, and it's an online community for getting ideas and getting involved. So you can learn, you can participate, and you can communicate your ideas. So this is the Clean Network. It's the homepage. You just register, and then you have access to all these tools. So what can you do on Clean Network? Well, first of all, you can set up your personal profile. You can share your interests and expertise. It's a social network. So first, this is what we do. We set up our profile. And so On this line here of items, you can see all the things that you can do here, all the things you have access to. And two things after James's presentation that I'm going to add in are questions to ask people what Native American lands they live on and what watershed they live in. People should know these things. They should be aware of these things. So another thing you can do is browse and post ideas, topics, and events. So the top menu here provides links to browse and post topics that you're interested in sharing with others or ideas that you've come up with so you can get help moving your ideas along. You can also post and browse events that are going on in communities. Another thing we can do on Clean Network is take courses. So Clean Network has an online education platform built right in because lifelong education is basically the solution to everything. Right here on the top menu bar, you can link to a page with all the courses, or you can link to a particular course, and more courses are being added as we speak. In fact, in preparation for the next meeting on October 26th, our presenter, Michael Schumann, is posting a backgrounder course here, this local investing course, on the basics of some of the ideas that he'll be digging into more deeply on his October 26th and November 17th presentations. Number 4, you can participate in groups and discussions. So these are the groups. So you can click on groups in the left-hand menu or in your profile. You can search by regional local groups or general topic areas. You can also start your own groups. We've set up a number of new groups in order to start up and continue activity related to this webinar series. Specifically, we've set up new business forums, cooperatives, which is our third event on November 12th. Solar energy, community solar, and more. We're having Bo Henson talk about that next week on Monday. We've got local investment. That's our November 17th seminar with Michael Schumann. We've got entrepreneurship. That's going to be discussed next week. And also our local food network. That's something our cooperative panel is going to go over. And so all these groups are already up and running. We'll be getting these groups together and determining courses of action to bring some of these beneficial ideas to fruition in our communities. And so please go online and get involved in the groups that interest you. Another thing you can do in your groups, you can actually manage projects. So we've added project management here in this community because some of the stuff we're going to be doing is long-term and complicated. Like James was saying, this is, you know, something in 25 years is going to be a big deal. So we need to get going on this stuff. And this will give us a way to keep everything in one place. So once you're in a group, you can click on projects and you can either continue to work on something you've started or you can get a new project going. So you can have group discussion panels, develop task lists and milestones. And so none of us will be able to have any excuses for not getting anything done on Clean Network. Okay, number 6, you can browse and post opportunities to help or to find help. So this is basically the classifieds, and you can reach these in the top menu area as well. Here you can see that you can browse or place classified ads where you can request help or expertise or let people know about resources that you have available. For example, let's say you're a business in town looking for advice on some legal documents you need to change for your incorporation to a worker-owned cooperative. That's something pretty specific and hard to find help. And so you can post your need in the classifieds or do a search. And then on the other side of that, like if you're a lawyer or a consultant, you can offer 1 or 2 hours a week, maybe pro bono, to help people to get their questions answered about their projects, or you can even, you know, put time up there where you can charge people as well. So this is just an example of a 15-minute consultation I put up there as an example that if someone wanted to know how their business might be affected by climate change, they can sign up for a consultation. And there's this Calendly app you can use where people can sign up. You can tell them what days and times you have available. You can even charge them if you want. And so we're hoping to get local experts and businesses to help by offering at least a small amount of pro bono time each week. So we'll be working on that. This is a group effort, and we want to help everyone find their role and find the information and help they need. So again, my apologies for the difficulties at the beginning of my presentation. This is cleannetwork.com. It's an online community for getting ideas and getting involved. It's to get the work done and the fun done to build a sustainable, equitable, prosperous life, community, and world with business models and lifestyles that are good for the climate, economy, and humanity. No cost, no advertising, all love, no hate. Just go to Clean Network and register, and you can get ideas and get involved. And so that is all I have to say about that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Amy. A couple of questions here. The first one is for James. And the question is, what do we have to do to get started doing this kind of analysis for our region?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have been in a discussion with Carbondale Spring earlier this year about doing it. The main thing that we've been missing is a piece of legislation that can drive the process. You know, in the study I just showed you, there was some existing legislation to clean up the river, right? And that was at the state level. And so what we did is we created this presentation to bring to local people as well as policymakers to train people about the legislation by giving them this background and then taking them into the legislation and then saying, look, you've got to be able to talk to your elected officials to support this legislation. That's the first thing we can do. But secondly, the other aspect of this is that the policymakers themselves have taken interest in this analysis, and we're hoping it catches on. But what Carbondale Spring could do would be to identify some legislation that would be somehow something that we could attach a presentation of this type to that. We do analyses on carrying capacity in water, energy, and agriculture. So it doesn't have to be just in agriculture. It can be other aspects as well. But we'd love to work with the Carbondale Spring on a project like this.
Okay. And one of the things that you were talking about earlier as far as redistricting and gerrymandering, and it is not unique to North Carolina. It is very much alive in Illinois, and but that is a different discussion panel than what we will have tonight. I did ask if we were recording, and yes, we are recording this session, and it will be posted both on the Clean Energy Network, and it will be posted in other locations. I think Carbondale Spring will share it. We'll share it with the Community Foundation as well, and want to make the information as accessible as possible. Another question here comes in saying, presumably these scenarios will change for a region based on climate change. Have you been doing any kind of analysis looking at what the carrying capacity is now versus what it will be based on climate changes? I think, James, that would be for you.
Right. Yes, we are factoring that in. So doing long-term projections involves differential equations. It also involves factoring in, as the questioner was saying, a gradient that shows an anticipated level of climate change in the future. And we have not specifically gone to the point of incorporating real-time data into our analysis at the moment. We are working on that. So what we're using so far is static data, and we have oodles of data that have to do with gradual increases in climate change. But in terms of real-time data, so we want to be able to source online data to be able to give us an up-to-the-minute picture of the best estimations of where climate change is headed. We haven't got to that stage yet. It's going to take a considerable amount of funding to be able to do that, but we're on track to do it, and we think we know how to do that. So yeah, stay tuned. We're about 4 years old now, and we're working on it constantly, and we've made lots of progress. But this is one area that we're going to specialize in.
Okay. All right. Amy, a question came in, is the Clean Network operating in other regions, or is it intended to operate in other regions?
Yes, Clean Network is currently just operating around here. I am the local catalyst, but the idea is to have people like me in other regions and other communities to kind of do the same things that I'm trying to do. So, for example, what I'm trying to do is just to get these projects going, to help get these meetings set up, to get the people together, to just keep people talking and keep people meeting. And so the idea is that if we can find people in communities that want to take the role as the catalyst, then we'll be adding in additional regions as we go. We hope to do that, yes, as soon as possible. We'd like to spread all these ideas as quickly and as far and wide as we possibly can.
Okay. So this is another question that came in. How can we who care so much about creating a local sustaining entity begin spontaneously collaborating with others in order to make this begin happening? How or what can we do that is very loud, that catches the attention of many, and that helps to spark this? I think that anybody could answer that. If anybody has an answer to that.
Would you like me to start that?
Sure.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of aspects to this. Immediately, I think of marketing and communication and technological capabilities to catch the attention of people. But even that's not nearly enough. You need to be able to have a new story, and the new story has to be something that really captures the zeitgeist of this moment. And I think what that has to do with is climate change for sure, but also the self-sufficiency of people within their regions. I think that appeals to people a lot because climate change seems so negative and out of our scope to do anything about. But self-sufficiency is something we can all contribute to, and then that will actually influence climate change. We won't be creating as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and we'll be sequestering carbon, and as a result of greater self-sufficient practices. So that's on the side of talking about catching the attention of people to spark a project. But the other side of this is that, as long as we're really thinking primarily about commercialization of localism, then we're missing the point of the cooperation involved. So that's why the emphasis on cooperation is very important, cooperatives in moving forward. So a healthy mix of small businesses and cooperatives, I think, moving forward, and public utilities is really a key way of getting people to understand that this can actually work, and it could really get us down the road and make a lot of progress in the direction that we want to go. In terms of spontaneously collaborating with each other, I think that involves a lot of things. It involves really having the idea that people know is going to work, and also that they're having fun doing it, that they're not being coerced to do it, that it's coming from their own motivation. And that involves really adequately training advocates to show people why this is important, give them the informational tools, speak to them in terms of their emotional intelligence, and then train them to become real activists. Now, so I understand Carbondale Spring has, and Carbondale itself has a really pretty burgeoning activist community. What I say is it's never enough. It's not enough until you get most of your population thinking like an activist. Then you've really got something. So those are the ways I would answer that question.
Chuck, could you maybe talk about that a little bit as well, and how what you've done with the food autonomy and how that's relating to trying to the carrying capacity of the land as well? You're on mute still, Chuck. Hey, Chuck, you're still on mute.
Okay, there we go.
Go.
Carbondale Spring was a group of activists that met weekly for almost a year And the result of that work led to 4 different project areas, one of them being food autonomy. So in the last year, Sonia told you some of the projects that developed. What we learned was that while there were Carbondale Spring activists involved in all of these projects, Carbondale Spring can't take responsibility for the growth of these projects because we met partners along the way in each of these areas that that shared the same vision that we did. And so I mentioned the idea of getting in on a think tank on one of Amy's project areas she set up, and let's meet and talk it through and develop. It's all a question of building partnerships and increasing the number of people that want to move in a direction that we've been discussing tonight. It takes on a life of its own, I'm happy to see, and happy to say.
Okay, Amy, how about you?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to James's answer there about activism. I'd like to also start developing a new kind of activism, like something different than maybe people who aren't going to go out and do a rally or aren't interested in politics, or just have some sort of aversion to that. But we have so many ways we can get active in our communities, and that's what Clean Network is supposed to be about. So helping people to understand what's going on in their communities, how they can get involved. There's been discussion of this idea of a climate conservation corps, where we're training youth and we're having big projects that are carried out by our communities. We'll have different measures of success. Instead of GDP, we're getting people to think about different ways of measuring things that actually mean success and and happiness instead of just more and more consumption. We're getting more of our emotions involved. Everything has to be involved with art, and that's a big. I think it's called creativism instead of activism. I think there's an actual word for that. And then just the whole lifelong education thing. I think just all those things, if we can put those all together with the traditional activism, then we would have a really good chance to reach more people. I think to hopefully reach everyone. That's my goal.
All right. Let's see. James, I think back to you and your experience, how has watershed issues already affected migration in the U.S.?
Wow, great question. Well, we're, take it a little more broadly. We're watching, with all the fires that are taking place, the migration from California or from the West Coast to other areas. A lot of people are doing that, and we're seeing news reports about that. But there's a broader picture here. I used to work in the Middle East, and I watched the migrations across the Middle East because of the lack of water in different areas. I helped to spearhead a project which collapsed, which was supposed to bring Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians into a model which was going to create better management of the Jordan River Valley. And it collapsed because of ISIS, and ISIS emerged because of refugee problems in the area. And so the basic problem is that there are many problems with this, but let's just picture it this way. You have people upstream and people downstream in an area. And let's say the people upstream are in one country and the people downstream are in another country. Take what's happening with Ethiopia and Egypt, for example, but it's actually happening everywhere in the world. People want to maximize the water that runs through their area. They don't care about what's happening so much downstream. This is really unacceptable. And so the migration problem fits into this, because as the people downstream have less and less water, they're going to be migrating to get out of that area, and they're going to be creating political difficulties in other places where they're going. So so the two things are intertwined, and I think there's a general political recognition that this is happening, but certainly a lot more attention is going to have to come to this. And excuse me, that's why water stability is one of the key indicators of where refugee problems are going to emerge from. Drier areas are just going to drive people out. And I think we're seeing a lot of that. Now, if the question pertains to the United States, we're already beginning to map and see the coincidences, let's say, of areas that are going above their carrying capacity for water, and the people that are moving out of that particular region because they recognize that problem. Where wells are going dry and less of water is available, and aquifers are running dry, precipitation is slowing down. There is definitely a move out of those areas in the United States. And I'm thinking of the Southwest and Colorado, up through Utah, and even Montana now. That's happening. And certainly it's happening on the West Coast too.
That's very interesting, James. It made me think of that if you run out of water downstream, you just move above everybody upstream. But eventually those people want to move above you. And at some point, everybody's upstream and you still have a mess downstream. So that it doesn't really solve your problem that nobody used the water correctly, right?
So let's all move to Canada.
Yeah. So this next one is this is an open question that the writer says does not need to be answered directly, but is more of a contemplative. And it says, how can you, I, and all of us individually become a role model who is very directly bringing together the different parts of our communities that have grown so far apart? And I feel like I probably should have tied that in more closely to the question about activism and things that we were just talking about, because it certainly is there's a lot of divisive and a lot of economic disparity that we certainly has been brought to light in 2020 through COVID response, or through the COVID pandemic. And so trying to find that way to bring us together, which obviously the organizers of this panel tonight and the next three in this series are meant to find ways for us to all have discussions, I think, on these subjects. Does anybody else have any input on that?
Yeah, I would agree with Amy about this, that it takes a new kind of creativism, meaning that I think what we're missing in activism right now is the cultural component. And I think back to, and again, coming from the idea of watersheds and the tribes that appreciated the watersheds, the tribal peoples. The fact is that we've lost the culture of watersheds, and I think that's what can be recreated. And I think that can be very exciting for people to recognize that they have deeper roots in the soil than they realize. You know, this is a kind of transplanted country that the white people came in and moved out the Indians, brought in slaves, and, you know, it's been in a lot of turmoil. We don't have the deeper roots in this culture that the Europeans have or people in Asia have. But at the same time, I think this particular crisis that we're going through will really establish our roots and really make us appreciate the meaning of self-sufficiency through cultural programs, cultural identity, and a new kind of ethical and moral understanding of what it means to be a good citizen and to practice politics that really benefit the civics of our society, so that we're taking on more responsibility and not saying, you know, it's all about my rights. No, well, it's about your rights, but it's also about the responsibility you have as a citizen. And I think citizen ethics to take care of their local communities will be a huge factor in the future. And I think that could become a role model for a lot of people.
Right. And I think you're right. As far as this pandemic, what it has taught us is, I think a year ago, this type of a panel would not have been as accepted as it is today. I know that certainly as a nonprofit, that even our board thought we don't need to do video calls, we'll just always meet together. And what we found is that there are platforms like this that were really in existence a year ago, 3 years ago. Video conferencing is not anything new, but the overall acceptance of it has been pushed to the front by this pandemic. And we certainly don't need to let go of that. Certainly, we were able to hear some wonderful things from you tonight, Mr. Quillian, and all of us, and we're all sitting many miles apart instead of driving to one conference center and sitting at one table, which is also really good too, but it allows us to have these conversations in a lot easier fashion than all of the travel that's necessary. One question, let's do one last question, and then we're right up at the time limit tonight. And maybe, James, this is something that it may take a longer period to add, so it may be something that maybe we want to email back to the participants later. But the question is, why the Upper French Broad River portion of the watershed? If it starts at a waterfall, it implies more tributary above that. And then was it limited by water quality legislation? And what about the lower reach down to the Mississippi? I think that's probably a pretty longer answer than what we've got to do here. But if you want to take a minute to try to address some of that, we can do that. Yeah,
The waterfall beginning the river, there are not tributaries moving into the waterfall. What's actually happening is it's an underground stream in the mountains somehow that's feeding the river. So we're feeding the waterfall that becomes the river below. So it would seem like there's tributaries, but they're underground tributaries, if in that sense. And they do get a sizable amount of rainfall there as well. And the other questions would take a long time to answer.
Well, we maybe can take those and try to send a response out via email. So we do want to try to end on time. We appreciate everyone that was able to be here with us tonight. I want to go ahead and highlight the fact that a week from tonight, we will be here again. Tonight was all about the big picture. We talked about the carrying capacity of the land and some of the things that are right here for us, whether it's through what Chuck talked about in the self-reliant local economy or through the clean network to help build the capacity and the interchange of information. So next week, we will dive a little deeper in and we will talk about supporting the local economy. We will have Michael Schumann, who is the author of The Local Economy Solution. He's an economist and a lawyer. We will also have Amy speaking again about shopcarbondale.com, which is a local pollinator for the businesses. And then we will have Bo Henson from Carbondale Spring talking about the solar program. So we really appreciate everyone here tonight and for the questions. And if more questions come in, we will certainly forward them on. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. I will also give just a quick plug for that. The third session is November 12th, talking about new business forums, including workers' cooperatives and the Illinois Collaborative Kitchen. And then on November 17th, local investing, again, featuring Michael Schumann, Kristen Barker, and Chuck Paprocki, where we will talk about investment opportunities and revolving loan funds. So thank you so much for our panelists tonight. We appreciate all the information you were able to deliver to us tonight. We thank you for all the attendees. And over the next few days, we'll be posting this online in multiple locations. So thank you so much for all being here tonight. Have a great evening.